first question, this was one where we were talking about socialization. It was on a podcast episode, the one we did with Kiba Canines, right? So this person asked, so for dogs who have a tendency to overcorrect, how do we get them to tone it down? Does it come down to practice and being around other dogs daily, right? So let's talk about the concept of overcorrecting, right? We talked about this a little bit in the Beckham's dog training video that we did last week, where we were talking about his dog Prince and how I thought he was overcorrecting a little bit, right? So first off, what is a correction in dog communication? A correction is a dog communicating a boundary to another dog, right? Mm-hmm. Now, what is an overcorrection? An overcorrection is when that dog uses, in our opinion, right, an excessive amount of force to deliver that message, right? Mm-hmm. So that could be if a dog is just kind of coming up to them and sniffing them and that dog wants to set a boundary, that could be instead of them just going, them going, right, like jumping on them and pinning them down and like just getting really over the top with communicating that boundary.
Yeah.
Right? Again, dog communication is normal, and a correction is a correction, and as long as it gets the point across, it's not that I have an issue with it, obviously. I want dogs to be able to communicate with each other. But if we have a dog that's consistently overcorrecting, there are two factors to why I think that will happen, right? Mm-hmm. So in the case of Prince, right, Beckham's dog training's dog, we discussed that I think Prince probably went straight to an overcorrection with the other dogs because it seems like Joel, the trainer, uses Prince for every single social test with other dogs, right? So Prince is probably going into social situations constantly on edge, thinking this dog is probably going to try to attack me, so I need to just get the job done right away to keep them away, right? That is my opinion, right? So how do we stop that in that situation? We balance out how many times we're using him as a tester dog. So if I start noticing he's going to overcorrections constantly, I start putting him around balanced dogs only until his stress level starts to come down a little bit, and then he starts realizing he can get away with getting his point across using less intensity, right? So that's one way we'll see it happen. And we see this with trainers' dogs a lot. Like I remember even Vera. Vera was kind of my tester dog for a while when I first started getting into dog training, where I would use her every time I would want to see how another dog is socially, right? And she was great with it for a very long time. And she never got bad with it, right? But you could tell she started hitting a point where she would come into socials and just be less overall playful and more just like, all right, here we go again, you know? And again, the second you start noticing that, it's your job to either, again, really balance it out, or maybe like 1 out of every 9 or 10 socials, they're around, you know, a dog that they actually need to like be doing correcting and stuff like that. And the others are social, well-balanced, no problem dogs, right? Or a lot of trainers, once they see their dog hit that point, they'll kind of retire them from being the social dog. We'll see this sometimes with dogs that just get older. Some dogs get older, they get a little more crotchety, they get over constantly being around these unbalanced dogs. And you hit the point where it's like, hey, you did your job, you can just chill now. Right? You're in retirement of this kind of stuff, right? You get to be around just easy dogs from now on.
Yeah.
That way you don't have to be on edge anymore, right? So that's one side of the overcorrection side of things, right? The other side that we'll see is dogs that are just unbalanced for whatever reason. Let's say they got attacked on a walk or attacked at a dog park or something like that, and they just immediately go on the defense and start just trying to get dogs before they get to them. It's a similar concept. We want to make sure first and foremost that dog is around only balanced dogs moving forward, right? So that way we don't validate in their head any of the thoughts they're having of like, these dogs are going to be coming after me. These dogs are going to be coming after me. Additionally, if we're having balanced dogs are going to be receptive to corrections in a way that unbalanced dogs aren't. So let's say this dog does correct them or overcorrect them. Those dogs are going to be like, all right, bro, it's cool. And then go and do something else.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And as we put that dog consistently that has this like quote unquote trauma around other dogs, right? Where they really think something bad's going to happen. The bad thing doesn't ever happen. And 2, they start seeing that their corrections are working. Their stress level starts to come down a little because they start feeling a little bit more in control of things, right? And as their stress level comes down a little bit, what happens is when they go to correct, the corrections are slightly less intense. And they start realizing if corrections are on a scale of 1 to 10, if the overcorrection is a 10, maybe the next time they need to correct, they correct at a 9. And And then they realize it worked. And then the next time they correct at an 8. And they realize that worked. And then it goes down to a 7, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In some cases, if it's more than just an overcorrection and it's them actually trying to like attack or go after the other dogs or injure the other dogs, again, that's where we would step in and apply an actual correction for that behavior to help them bring it down a little bit. Because let's say 10 is the highest overcorrection where it's still safe. Let's say 11 is them actually going after the dog, right? If they do an 11, obviously I have to step in and discipline for that. And that discipline, the dog will still be uncomfortable around the other dogs, but that might bring it from the 11 down to an 8.
Yeah.
Where then it starts turning from, instead of an attack, it just is an overcorrection then at that point, and then we could start that process of teaching them to bring it down. But the key is knowing the dogs that you're putting your dog around. That's the biggest thing that creates these issues in the first place, is you constantly socializing your dog in improper places with dogs that you shouldn't be socializing your dog with.
Yeah.
Your dog doesn't need as much socialization as they think. And as long as you make sure that you're doing less socialization and that less socialization that you're doing is around good dogs, you shouldn't run into a lot of issues with this.
Yeah.
All right. So that's topic 1.
Yeah, that was just from experience when Devin used to work at the daycare. She used to bring Bender all the time.
Yeah.
But then it was a noticeable difference towards the end of her working there, where he would go and he would just basically just shut down.
Yeah.
Like he didn't want to be there. You could just tell.
And we see that a lot with daycares in general, right? Where your dog can go to daycare, and the first couple times they go, they're playing machines. But then because the environment is so chaotic and they can't get away from it, and there's so many dogs that are constantly coming up to them, they're needing to increase the intensity of their reaction to get those dogs to create space for them, right? And that just comes down to, again, you're socializing your dog in an improper situation. There's too many dogs for them to get their point across with 1 or 2 corrections, where they need to do it 15 times because there's 15 different dogs that are approaching their space. So you want to be aware of those types of things too. Okay. Next question. All right. This one's a little, we kind of made a post about this earlier, right? So this is kind of the age-old saying of correcting or punishing for emotional state. So this person said, how can you reward or punish for known behaviors but non-emotional state? We can inadvertently reward emotional state, though. So much easier to give them a job and then hold them accountable for that. Whatever. Generally, the point of this question was, we tell people a lot of times you can't correct for an emotional state, right? And this goes against what a lot of trainers will tell you, which is like correct the anxiety, correct the fear, things like that. You know what I mean? You can't really correct for an emotional state, but we also kind of contradict ourselves a little bit and say you want to be mindful of where you're giving praise, because you could reward an emotional state, right? You could reward a fearful state, right?
Yeah.
So if we could reward an emotional state, why can't we correct for one? And I think that serves for needing some clarification on what I mean by rewarding for emotional state and correcting for an emotional state, right?
Okay.
So first things first, we need to be aware of the fact that emotional states are not very conscious things for dogs or for people. Let's humanize this for a minute. Josh, have you ever been in an argument with somebody?
Yes.
And you're like, we're fighting about something. And the person says, you need to calm down. And you're like, what are you talking about? I am calm.
Yes.
Right? I think we've all been in that situation before.
Of course.
Right? In the heat of that moment, we are not aware of the emotional state that we're in.
That's 100% true.
We're not. Right? We're aware of what's happening, right? And we're feeling a certain way while that thing is happening, but we're not conscious of, wow, I'm really amped up right now. Now, sometimes you can be. We could argue that a little bit, obviously. But generally speaking, we're much more aware of the things we're doing. Let's say you were arguing and you were pounding on the table constantly, right? Or you're arguing and you're, I don't know, doing some sort of physical thing, right? And that person said, hey, stop pounding on the table right now.
Yeah.
Right? You'd be like, oh, yeah, you're right. I am pounding on the table right now. Right?
You're being annoying, yes.
So when I say you can't correct for an emotional state, what I really mean is that you could be much more clear about correcting for something a dog is doing while they're in an emotional state. And if you start practicing impulse control, again, with the human side of things, let's say I'm pounding on the table. Let's say I become mindful of, I can't pound on the table right now. And I'm still in an argument, but I'm like, I can't pound on the table at this moment, right? your energy is probably going to come down a little bit because your brain is focusing a little bit more on what you're doing and how you're feeling in that moment then at that point, right? So your stress level, it will inadvertently affect that emotional state of mind, right?
Yeah.
Now let's use the opposite, right? Let's say rewarding for an emotional state. It's not that if I'm petting a dog when they're anxious, that they're going to be like, oh, I'm anxious right now. This reward is for being anxious. I should be more anxious. It's not like that's going to happen. But what happens is you coddle the dog while they're anxious. And again, humanizing things further. Let's say I'm anxious about something and somebody comes over and they say, you know what? You're totally right to be scared of that thing. That thing actually is really scary over there. You see that? You see that Christmas tree over there in Home Depot that's out the last week of October?
Yeah.
You know, and it's really scary because it shouldn't be out until probably beginning of November or middle of November. You're totally right to be scared of that. That's stupid. Right? We wind up coddling to that state of mind of reassuring ourselves that there actually is something scary. Right? So the things that we do when we're anxious, right? When we're reinforcing those types of things, even though the dog may not know that they're for the anxiety or they're for the fearfulness, right? By reinforcing the things the dog is doing while they're in that state of mind, it could inadvertently create more anxiety by reassuring them of how they're feeling, right? So that's kind of how some of that works with that type of stuff, right? And that's kind of my clarification on the whole concept of correcting for emotional states of mind or rewarding for emotional states of mind.